So let me introduce this afternoon's speakers. First, we have with us Katie Akers, the Acting Executive Director of the Kentucky Center for Education and Workforce Statistics. Dr. Akers will be sharing about the Kentucky Longitudinal Data System and how they've been able to connect education and employment outcomes at the county level to aid with strategic planning at the local level. Next, we have Scott Godfrey, an analyst from the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And Mr. Godfrey is going to focus on the state's graduate employment outcome tools, part of the Minnesota statewide longitudinal education data system. Our third speaker is going to be Carol Rogers, Deputy Director of the Indiana Business Research Center. Ms. Rogers will be sharing about Indiana's efforts to add occupational titles and codes to its data system in order to better measure outcomes of career pathways and other programs. And finally, you'll hear from Rachel Zinn, Director of the Workforce Data Quality Campaign, who's going to help translate all the activities that these folks have happening in their states into the implications for federal policy. So I'll now turn it over to Dr. Akers to get us started.
Thank you. I'll bring this down. Is this okay? Great. Well, thank you all for coming today. Thank you so much to the Workforce Data Quality Campaign to give us this opportunity. Folks in positions like myself and my colleagues up here have spent a lot of time working on our state longitudinal data systems, and it's really exciting for us to get to share some of the outcomes that we found and to talk a little bit more about what we do with all of this data that we put together. As mentioned, I am from Kentucky, from an office called the Kentucky Center for Education and Workforce Statistics. We call ourselves the Center, or KSUS, which rhymes with couscous, or Dr. Seuss. We are an independent state agency, but we're housed within the Education and Workforce Development Cabinet, so we are a state office. And we are the office that maintains what's called the Kentucky Longitudinal Data System. It's one of the most comprehensive longitudinal data systems in the country and includes data from early learning, public K-12, public, private, and out-of-state, post-secondary, and it also includes workforce, including UI, wages, claims, vocational rehabilitation, Office for the Blind, training providers, and all of this in one system. And so I'm going to demonstrate just a little bit what we're able to do with all of that. We are governed by a board that includes the heads of all of these education and workforce agencies, so that helps us drive the work that we do, set our research agenda, and also helps us stay connected with policymakers and our leaders, as well as our practitioners throughout the state. We have been in existence since about 2009. We were called the P20 Data Collaborative in Kentucky. Since then, we do have state legislation that created our current office called the Kentucky Center for Education and Workforce Statistics. So we are tasked, I mentioned the big one that a lot of people think about, and that's maintaining this P20W SLEDS, State Longitudinal Data System. But we don't just do that just to put all this data together. We really do it to offer program evaluation, to look at education and workforce programs throughout Kentucky, as well as develop state-level metrics. So a consistent metric can be defined by our office by working in conjunction with other state agencies that we can use across the state, all the way down to the high school, the district, the county, the workforce investment district, and et cetera. And we do all of this really to better inform policymakers and stakeholders. We have a variety of annual reports that we put out. We also do topical reports and white papers, but a lot of the work that we do is in these annualized reports. So that top one is the Annual County Profile Report. We'll get to that in just a minute. But the majority of the work that we do is around what we call the Feedback Report series, and that's just as the name sounds. So those reports are to give feedback back to folks at multiple different levels. So therefore, principals, as they want to know about the success of their recent graduates going on into college, or to college administrators or academic professionals wanting to know the success of some of their graduates and the alignment into the workforce. So we provide these feedback reports down to the lowest level of data that we're able to. So typically that's at the high school level, the district level, in the case of adult education outcomes for that adult education center. So we're able to provide this data back. Everything is put out online, so all of these reports are available. And we get a really great response, and we get a lot of really great questions from superintendents wanting to know, but I have lots of questions about such and such. So we're able to work with them to help customize these reports. More and more we're getting questions about the workforce. So what about this alignment, and how do we show some type of pipeline? So that's really what's on the horizon for our office. I mentioned that our board drives this research and reporting agenda. So everything that we do in our office is aligned to one of these 5 really high-level research and reporting agenda items. So we call our research and reporting agenda education and workforce alignment. So in our office, alignment means we're able to put these different types of data all together, but from a programmatic standpoint, it means that we can produce reports letting people or letting programs know what other programs their folks are involved with. And I think that that's been a really great theme as we've been working with the Workforce Data Quality Campaign to kind of hear other states as well thinking about that and the alignment between all of these programs and how we can better serve our end customer. So some of the ones that are really critical with the workforce data would of course be anything dealing with outcomes. We get lots of questions about the success of high school graduates versus high school dropouts. So what types of careers are they in? What are their earnings? Is there any type of demand? And so the workforce data is really critical for those pieces. And then also the outcomes for workforce training provider programs. That's our way of saying WIOA. So that's something else that we've really been working on. Kentucky continues to follow a really strong strategic plan for our Kentucky Workforce Investment Boards. And as we continue to follow this plan, this is a diagram that's very similar to probably a lot of states' diagrams, and just thinking about how we are able to achieve this, where we know we have individuals coming into the system. We know that there are a variety of different programs and activities that these individuals have, and then we have the outcomes for those. And it's really being able to link those across, that the need for this education and workforce data together is becoming increasingly apparent. So how does our office help with that? Well, we think that we provide kind of the sweet spot in talking about education data, economic development data, as well as workforce development. So there's a programmatic overlap there, but there's also a data overlap. So that's where our office can really help at all different levels throughout the state. So we have something called a county profile. I believe you all have orange notebooks. So in there's something that looks like this. Does anyone know Jefferson County, Kentucky? So that's Louisville. So I picked it simply because it's the largest one, and I thought perhaps folks had heard of Louisville. This is what we call our Kentucky County Profile. These are produced annually. We publish them in a book that we send to all of our legislators, a lot of our state officials, and it includes information on every county in Kentucky. And then we also roll that up to their workforce investment areas, as well as their area development districts and the state level. And this report includes information that's used for strategic planning at all different levels. As we continue to work to get more counties in Kentucky work ready, that's one of our biggest drives at the cabinet, this is a great tool that we can use to help the conversation with counties specifically, but also at the regional level. So this report includes information about education and workforce, all of the kind of population generalized information, but also some fairly specific information about, for example, the number of students ready for college and/or career by graduation. How many were meeting those in Kentucky are our academic benchmarks to show that they're ready. And then we also talk about the population in terms of educational attainment. On the back side of the report, We also include information about the education pipeline. So I think that in the years to come, as we revise this report, we're just going to call it the pipeline. So as we transition to not only education and thinking about what is our public enrollment and our private enrollment and how many students are entering kindergarten, but to really transition this into how many are then entering the workforce and what types of industries and sectors are the graduates from Jefferson County specifically going into. So it's a really exciting upcoming piece of this profile. We also include information about what colleges and universities that they attend, and then information about adults with a bachelor's degree or higher. So we've worked with county officials specifically to find out what are the things that they want to have on hand really quickly, not only about their county to try to figure out where it is that perhaps they need to put forth some extra efforts, but also that they can see other counties are either around them or their peer counties. They can go in and see, and they know that there are metrics that are the same in every single report. So when we put in here the average junior year, scores for 2014 graduates, as you thumb through the book, you would see that same exact measure for every single county. You can see it rolled up to your workforce district, to your area development district, and it really offers some consistency, as well as let mayors, for example, know at the state level what the types of metrics are that we're really looking at. So I think that it really represents a great partnership. This is one of our most used reports, and it's also handy because it's just front and back. But if you have other counties that you would like to see, all of those are available online, as well as some maps that help show some of those differences and can answer questions as well. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to some of my colleagues. And I believe we're doing questions at the end.
Thank you, Kate. Am I okay? I'm too loud? Okay. So again, I'm Scott Godfrey. I'm from the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, and I'll be talking to you today about how we are using longitudinal data to better understand college to workforce transitions. In your folder, there is a front-back handout with just some summary information if you'd like to follow along on there as well. So one of the stated visions of our longitudinal data system is to assist in identifying the most viable pathways for individuals in achieving successful outcomes in education and workforce. This is predicated on the idea that it's no longer acceptable to assume that degree attainment is going to lead to successful workforce outcomes. And to that end, we've created the Graduate Employment Outcomes tool, which will follow graduates into the workforce and seeks to answer questions about this transition. Before I go too much further, you've already seen one acronym, and I'll be using another, so I just want to quickly clarify the terms. So when I say SLEDS, it's the Minnesota Statewide Longitudinal Education Data System, and that is where we link workforce, higher ed, and K-12 data into a single database. And then from that database, we can populate tools such as the Graduate Employment Outcomes, or GEO tool, that I'll be talking to you about today. We use SLEDS and GEO to look at a variety of different things, but I want to quickly go over 4 with you. The first of which is, again, this nature of the transition from college into the workforce. So we can look at questions such as, when are graduates employed part-time or full-time? How does that part-time, full-time employment change over time? In what industries are graduates finding employment? And what are the wages that they're finding when they do find employment? We can also look at supply and demand in the workforce. Are there certain industries in which graduates are finding full-time employment, and a high proportion of graduates are? Or conversely, are there industries and majors with which graduates are really struggling to find full-time employment? We can also use SLEDS and GEO to investigate the skills gap. And for those who aren't familiar with the term, that's the difference between the skill levels of current job seekers and the skills required of the jobs that are available to them. And so we can use SLEDS and GEO first to look at graduates that are coming out of higher education and how they might align with industries in which skill gaps have been defined. But then we can also look at the wages that are being earned by graduates in those industries. One part of the skill gap conversation is the difference between there not being graduates and employers not being able to attract the graduates that they need for those jobs. And so wages help us bring more information to that conversation. From the higher education perspective, we use SLEDS and GEO to inform the return on investment discussion around higher education. In Minnesota, as well as across the nation, college costs are increasing, student loan debt is increasing, and so we can use GEO and SLEDS to help inform the discussion moving forward about student loan debt and the state's role in financing higher education. The primary motivation for SLEDS from the workforce side then really is to help students and job seekers set realistic expectations. When they're done with their education, what is the workforce going to be like? What are their odds of full-time employment? What wages should they expect? And then as well, getting back to a few of the points that I covered before, we do also want to use it to look at issues of oversupply, undersupply of labor in strategic sectors of the economy. From the higher education perspective, SLEDS was sort of the first time that all of this data was available systematically in Minnesota across all types of higher education institutions. And so just even having the system itself is motivation enough to work on creating it. But beyond that, nationwide as well as in our state, there is this increasing pressure to quantify or measure performance, and in Minnesota that has now taken the form of state statute, so these systems will become increasingly important in that conversation. The Graduate Employment Outcomes Tool then shows how many recent Minnesota graduates have found jobs in Minnesota 1, 2, 3, and 4 years after graduation. It features median wages earned in top industries and regions in which they have found jobs. And the data is based on Minnesota graduates from July 2006 until June of 2013. The wage data is from information collected from employers that are subject to unemployment insurance taxes in Minnesota. The data that is presented is in the form of tables, charts, and as well for those who are interested in diving deep into the data, we do offer Excel downloads as well. We designed GEO to meet the needs of 4 primary stakeholders. So I've already talked about students and job seekers, but with them I would lump in parents and career counselors, because this really is about helping these individuals set realistic expectations, and parents and career counselors play a very real role in that process. In addition, education program planners will be able to use the GEO tool. They'll be able to look at the outcomes of their graduates and perhaps augment or tweak their educational programs to try to impact the outcomes of the graduates. Finally, policymakers are also one of the targets for SLEDS and GEO. Talking about oversupply, undersupply of graduates in key sectors of the economy, sometimes that raises sort of past individual educational programs and is something that's better tackled at a policy level statewide. So we also gear towards them as well. And so we've frequently presented the tool to these stakeholders. We always solicit their feedback when we do, but we also try to show them really how to use this tool, because there is a lot of data packed in there, but it can be very useful once you really know what you're doing with it. And the reactions we've had are very positive thus far. So I'd like to briefly walk you through the GEO tool. If you'd like to try to follow along, the link is there on the screen. It's pretty brief, and in your handouts. The main page shows you a sort of snapshot visualization that allows you to see some of this at a higher level and quickly digest it. But I'm going to take you through the data tool portion of it, and there are links for that on the page if you decide to visit it. The main GEO tool then looks like this, and some of the details will be harder to see, but there are some pictures in your handout as we get further along. But it allows filtering by 5 primary factors. So the first is the graduation year of the class that you'd like to look at. The second is the location of the school within Minnesota, so Minnesota regions. You can also select by award type, so certificates, associates, bachelor's degrees. Institution type, which at present is 2-year, 4-year, public-private type selections, and as well instructional programs or the majors in which the students have graduated. And once you have those filters selected, you can see your outcomes on 3 tabs: hourly wage trends, annual wage and employment trends, as well as employment status. And so I'd like to just cover the first 2 of those tabs and show you a little bit of what GEO can do. So within GEO, we have comparisons that we call both vertical and horizontal comparisons. So for example, on the hourly wage trends, we can look at it after the 1 year after graduation, the median hourly wages that graduates are earning, and we can compare them vertically to each other, so across majors. But then we can also follow in the tool horizontally across time. So we can see what they were earning 1 year after graduation, 2 years after graduation, and 4 years after graduation. Similarly, on the annual wage and employment tab, we have percent of employed graduates that are employed full-time, so we can look at that vertically, comparing across majors, as well as then horizontally across time to see how full-time employment varies over time. There's also a really unique comparison available on this as well, in that we have annual median wages in the second year after graduation and annual median wages for those employed full-time the second year after graduation, which again, in setting realistic expectations for job seekers and students, we can give them that dichotomy. If you're not working full-time, how might your wages differ from those who would be working full-time? Additionally, earlier I talked about top industries and top regions of employment, and on the hourly wage trend there are these two columns with little graphic, sort of infographics that you can click on, and when you do, it expands out into a table that for industry breaks down the proportion of graduates that have found employment in that industry, as well as the median hourly wages that they're earning in those industries. Similarly then with region, it breaks it down by Minnesota region, the proportion of graduates that have found employment in those regions, and the hourly wages that they're earning in those regions. So again, setting realistic expectations for graduates. But these facets of the tool also allow us to try to meet one of the criticisms of GEO, and that is that we lack occupational data in our unemployment insurance data set. And I believe that Carol might be talking a little bit more about this after me. But it's a real struggle that educational programmers want to look at their majors and they want to ask, is the graduate working in an occupation that is related to their major? And while we can't directly do that, one way that we're trying to indirectly do it is with this industry, the industry of employment. So with something like computer science, which is on the screen, wages across industry tend not to vary much because computer science is sort of a portable degree, right? It's useful in many industries, so you could be working in your occupation across a variety of industries. But if you compare it to something like chemistry, which you can see more on the slide handouts, you do see variation across industries, and in particular in the retail trade industry, it's much lower than in other areas. So again, while we cannot say that yes, they're working in an occupation that directly aligns with their major, we can try to infer that, well, the chemistry graduates that are working in retail trade likely aren't working in occupations that are directly related to their major, which means their wages are lower. So. Next up for SLEDS and GEO, the first is institutionally identified reporting. So we've been authorized by the Minnesota legislature to add institution name to GEO, so you'll be able to select a college and see their programs. So we think this will be quite popular comparing colleges to each other in their programs. The biggest challenge on deck for us is that we are unable to link K through 12 to workforce data. The two databases don't share a common identifier that we can link across, and so all our analyses right now are limited to college enrollees. We have been trying with driver's license data at the Department of Public Safety to try to bridge this gap because it could greatly enhance the amount of analyses that we can bring to bear and the information that we can bring to the public. Beyond that, there's contact information on your sheets on the one-page summary, and any of these people would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Yes. I can hear me now. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank my colleagues, Kate and Scott, because they've really given really interesting presentations, and you very nicely set the stage for this kind of niche talk that I'm going to give about occupation data. So thank you for that, Scott. We've been doing integrated records data for many years in Indiana. Oh, and thank you. That will help with the slide deck. So I'll move to the, there we go. We've been doing it for many years. We started in the mid-2000s even though people have been talking about using record linkage with administrative records probably for decades, certainly since computers became more prominent. But by the 2000s, I think people were beginning to realize that it was becoming easier technically to actually make these record linkages. Computer disk space became very cheap. Servers were smaller, faster, better. And so a lot of things conspired, along with what I saw was a greater sophistication among policymakers and state agency heads about what could be done with data that were collected over here for A, but we wanted to use to answer questions X, Y, and Z for something else. And so we were very lucky in our state that we had agency heads as well as their deputies and their labor market directors or their higher education analysts who really believed this could be done. And so we kind of were like Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams. If we build it, others will come and want to share their data with us. So we've been doing similar things to other states. It's always interesting. I love the WDQC convenings because we all take somewhat different approaches to what we're doing. And in Indiana, what we have done sometimes is that we get frustrated. We're very practical people in Indiana. We love administrative record linking because it's already there. It's data that's already been collected. We're not adding to respondent burden. My friends from the Census Bureau or from folks from the House can appreciate the fact that a lot of businesses and individuals get kind of tired filling out forms for multiple agencies. So linking these records across agencies to create new information is a very practical thing to do. If you ever want to learn more about Hoosiers, that's what we call people in Indiana. You're a Minnesotan, but I'm a Hoosier, so go figure. Read The Indiana Way. I give that book to every new friend who moves to the state. We love attracting people from other states, by the way. But one of the first aspects of The Indiana Way is it explains why Hoosiers, first of all, don't like to spend money, secondly, don't like taxes, and secondly, don't like to reinvent any wheels. So read The Indiana Way by James Madison, the historian, not the former president of the United States. So from frustration came a plan. We were frustrated because there were no SOCs in our data. SOCS, Standard Occupational Classification Code. I had socks on these slides, little pairs of socks, and somebody in my office complained about it, and they said, nobody's going to know what you mean by having little pairs of socks there, so I took them off. Should I put them back on? Show of hands. Put them back. Oh, okay, so all right. So we're going to do that. The SOCs are missing from our data. We have SOC codes on very few records. You have to be unemployed in order to get an occupational code. And up until a couple of years ago, even though there was an occupation code, it was only 2-digit. Yuck. For any of you who know, SOCs come in 2, 4, and 6-digit flavors, and the more the numbers, the greater the detail. So rather than just scientist, it might be bioscientist, or somebody come up with a good analogy. I can't think of one, but the greater the detail, certainly for folks like us, we want precision in these data, right? We really want to hone in. We don't want a surrogate. We don't want to just get close. So out of this frustration, we decided we were going to work with our Department of Workforce Development. By the way, our former commissioner and someone who helped our system happen is at the back of the room, Scott Sanders, who is the executive director of NASWA. And if you want to find out what NASWA stands for, ask Scott. So he'll be able to tell you. But with Scott's help and with the Commission for Higher Education, writing letters of support, we were successful in getting a 3rd or 4th round WDQI grant. Our proposal was to assign directly or indirectly SOC codes to wage records, and then from wage records to education records, and vice versa. So as I go through these slides, what I'll be showing you is some information. You can read the slides yourself or pull it out of your folder. I'm not going to read the slides to you. But we're going through a multi-phase system to take the millions of records that we have and identify an occupation code for them. It really sounds simple when I tell people what we're doing occupation assignment. It sounds, oh sure, of course you're doing that. Aren't they already there? Well, no, the government actually doesn't collect everything about us. I don't know if many of you realize that, but they actually don't. And so we need to come up with some methods to do this. There are plans that I've heard about to change the laws or rules about UI wage records that are submitted by payroll employers to include SOC codes. I'm not going to hold my breath. I'll hope for the best. But what we're doing here is planning for that worst case, which is we don't have them available. So phase 1 for us has been to suck in as much existing data as possible. Public licensing and permitting, as well as certifications or certificates that boards, state boards provide to people, have proven very valuable to us in helping to assign SOC codes. So we're using the occupation employment statistics staffing patterns, as well as a whole bunch of crosswalks for things. I identify lots of them here in the slide deck in order to basically assign the appropriate SOC code for doctors, chiropractors, vets, landscape firms, folks who work for them, who apply chemicals. So think about all those people who go to suburbia and spray lawns. We can put SOC codes on those. We also have now, at the time I created this slide, if I'm on the public records, let me move forward here. At the time I did this slide, we had 750,000 public employees with job titles, departments, addresses, and government organization. We now have 1.5 million. One of the good things about this is that the data increase exponentially day after day after day. We take in new data. This is really critical to our model for assigning SOC codes. I don't know how many of you have access to your public employee compensation. Many states require this. Our state has required it since 1947. Because we are so data hungry, we built a collection system actually for certain state agencies to collect their tax, finance, and employment data. Okay. I just got a heads up that I'm at my 10 minutes. So we're taking in all of this direct information. We're running it through our models on a weekly and quarterly basis. We're moving into phase 2 actually right now. We've already done the phase 1 work where we're developing models. We have a team of statisticians who have developed predictive models using, again, all of the data that the Bureau of Labor Statistics provides, that our Department of Workforce Development provides, and building massive numbers of crosswalks. We're using Indiana University's supercomputers to do this just because there's so much data. And there are so many processes, so many cycles of computing that we have to go through for this. It all sounds very impressive, doesn't it, when you say it like that? It's really grinding work. and a lot of it has been very hard and very tedious. But for us, the bottom line is, in phase 3, we're going to get to constructing career pathways or plotting trajectories to find out what happens to all these engineers we graduate from Purdue University. They don't all go to other states, although many of them do. We want to see what happens to them in our state, or in partnering with Kate and Joshua, Kate from Kentucky, Joshua from Ohio, other states, find out what are they doing in your state and what is that trajectory. I have a diagram in the handout for you. We call it the Tranche Method. Our head economist is the person who came up with the Tranche Method. It's really a finance term, but the idea is instead of following flows of money, we're following flows of data that will give us occupation. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Rachel. Everyone still with us? That is a lot of data. That is a lot of little pictures. But you get the point, right? That the bottom line is all of this is coming back. You're hearing a couple of common concerns, a lot of stress about the value of college education, what's happening to people in the labor market, what kind of career pathways allow access to people from all backgrounds to fulfilling careers, and also to make sure that they're being trained with skills that our employers need. That's what all of this work and all of these data sets are helping us to do. So a couple of lessons that I wanted to highlight for federal policy, and I'm just going to touch on these and feel free to ask questions afterwards, and also we're happy to kind of follow up as a resource to get into the details later. So one thing that I hope you have heard loud and clear is that state data systems are doing some pretty incredible things. They're creating tools that people are really using. I think the Minnesota tool is a great example, and the fact that they're really going out to high schools. They're sitting down with guidance counselors, teaching them how to use the tools, and they've heard from guidance counselors say things like, I was having trouble starting these kind of conversations with students about, how much debt do I take out and how do I weigh different schools, and just having this tool in front of me and having the data helped me have that conversation, and it helped the students go home and have that conversation with their parents. It's important stuff. So these data systems are doing good things. One thing that I just want to make sure is really clear is that the data that we're talking about is providing these benefits while protecting individual privacy. All of the data that's being made public, all of this data about wages for different careers and different outcomes from different college programs, it's all groups of students. You don't know how your neighbor down the block, how much she's earning after 3 years out of school. You can call her and ask her, but that's not our business. So it's protecting individual privacy. And there's a lot of security in place, and very few state folks actually have access to the individual data as well. And those folks are rigorously trained, so there's very, very few people who can actually see who this individual data is connected to. I want to make that clear. The other thing to note is that these state data systems, federal grant support has been really crucial. There have been 2 federal grants that have been really instrumental in helping states build these systems. One is from the U.S. Department of Education. They're the state longitudinal data system grants. We're not that creative about grant naming, but they have worked. The other is from the U.S. Department of Labor, the Workforce Data Quality Initiative grants, and those have worked in conjunction with the education grants to help, as the panelists discussed, help to link the data between education and workforce. And we understand budget times are tough, but we think there's really good evidence that these grants are paying off, they're doing things, they're showing tangible results. So hopefully if you hear about these grants and these funding proposals, you'll think back to some of these presentations and some of the tools that these are helping to create. And finally, in terms of supporting the state data systems, in addition to funding, which is easier to talk about than come by these days, federal law can provide kind of a legal privacy framework that allows these linkages to take place. A lot of this work has been done in compliance with the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. FERPA is what governs really a lot of the education data and how that data can be shared, and then matched with some of this other data to see how students are doing in careers. So that law is often under consideration. There have been proposals that would limit the linkages. So something just to think about when Congress is considering revisions to these laws, reauthorizations, is to think about very carefully about whether any of these revisions would limit this kind of linkage at the state level. Higher education policy. This is a priority for, I'm sure, for the congressional staff, for a lot of your bosses getting this done. So states are definitely seeing the demand for and the utility of the college outcome data. But one thing that Kate and Scott didn't address is that their outcome data is fantastic and it's being used, but it's a little limited. So it's limited to folks who are working within their states, correct? So we only know about graduates that stay in the state. I don't know how many of you, live in the same state from where you graduated. Probably not a ton. Especially folks with more education tend to move around a lot. There's a lot of mobility. And so while the state systems are awesome and are doing really important things, there are limits. And there are some things that we would like nationwide information for. It would be nice to have some nationwide information that captures what all graduates are doing, not just those who stay within the state. So federal law can support that through national data linkages. There's a lot of data, again, that is currently collected at the federal level. It's not a new data collection. It's allowing linkages and access to data that already exists. And in addition to allowing data linkages between things like tax data that's held at the Social Security Administration and information that we have about federal student aid recipients. So that would, at the federal level, pretty quickly allow us to look at student aid recipients and how they're doing on their wages and whether they're employed after graduation. In addition to that, higher education policy that sets employment metrics. There's often debate and kind of pushback about whether we should be measuring employment outcomes at all. It's really clear from us and from with our national partners who talk to families and parents and workers that they want this information, that this is really crucial to them as they choose. It is certainly not capturing the entire value of a college education. We do not want to suggest that at all. There's a lot of value that is very difficult to measure, isn't quantifiable, and certainly isn't captured within earnings. But this is a piece, and this is a piece managing expectations, making smart decisions. And so we really think that federal law should support students getting this kind of information. In addition to higher education policy specifically, there's a couple other areas where federal data policy is relevant. So a lot of the state analysis on labor market conditions and also just looking at occupation and careers, that's really done on a foundation of labor market information provided by the federal government. There's lots of federal statistical agencies. We have Census and the Bureau for Labor Statistics and the National Center for Education Statistics. All of these are providing really important building blocks that allow our state colleagues to be drilling down a little bit better and making sure that education and training programs are aligning with labor market demand. So again, this is a funding ask. I used to work for the Office of Management and Budget, so it always kind of hurts my heart a little bit to ask for funding, but this is an important one, and I know that the federal statistical agencies it's tempting to look at these line items when you're making hard budget decisions and say, well, this isn't about people, this is about data, and this is an easy one to cut. It really is about people at a very real level. So again, something to consider when you're going line by line is that there's very real activity, very real concerns about jobs and education behind those numbers. In addition, aligning reporting requirements and metrics across programs. There's a lot of programs out there dedicated to education and training. They all have slightly different kind of data requirements and metrics to measure their success. The more that they're aligned, the easier it is for the programs to work together and for the state systems to combine this data and think about how we're preparing people as a whole, not within program silos, right? Your bosses don't ask you, so how is that, that Workforce Innovation Act Title I program, how many people is that preparing for jobs? No. We want to know, is the workforce system preparing people for the jobs in demand? We really need to think about things as a system, and having common data definitions and reporting requirements helps us do that. And finally, occupation data, which Carol did a great job of explaining how they're trying to do a workaround, right? Because we don't have this data handy. There's no good administrative data source sitting there that has occupation in it. It has industry, but again, that's bigger. Accountants, it's an occupation. You might work for a hospital, you might work for a school, you might work for any variety of industries, but you're still an accountant, and we just don't know that right now with the information we have. So it's something to consider when setting performance metrics for various programs. There is a very high interest in wanting data on training-related employment. We hear that a lot. Very legitimate question. Are people getting jobs in the field they're trained in? A little bit tricky to answer. So it's just something to consider when putting performance requirements in place. And also, there have been federal proposals to require employers to report occupation information on the wage records that the states get that are allowing these linkages that we've been talking about. Again, something to consider. It's very valuable information. It's so valuable that Carol has 16 slides of processes about how they're going to do it. So
16 people working on it.
Yes. So obviously, clearly, it's something that states are willing to dedicate a lot of resources to. This is important data, and if we could help out at the federal level with having that readily available, something to carefully consider. So I'm going to wrap up because I want to make sure that we have time to get to your questions. And again, I hope that you'll view Workforce Data Quality Campaign as a resource as you have questions going forward. We're always happy to put you in touch with our colleagues from the states and our other national partner organizations that work on these types of programs and these kinds of issues in different areas. So thank you. And yeah, I think we'll just open it to questions. So right now, again, it's administrative data, so there is not sort of an opt-out mechanism. There is information, it's required, most colleges have a basic sort of consent form saying that, we are collecting data, it may be used for research. But so it depends which data you're talking about. So sorry, so the loan data, in order to administer the loan and Pell Grant programs, we need data on those people. So the Education Department has it, and likewise with the tax data. So there isn't currently kind of an opt-out mechanism to say, well, you can use it to administer the loan programs, but you can't use it, say, to look at earnings outcomes for research or consumer information. That doesn't exist right now. Oh, there's two, yeah.
For the different state systems for the wages, is there some categories for different genders and ethnicities, or
start, and then I'll pass it along to my colleagues. The data that we get from we fairly similar to Minnesota, get our workforce data through the unemployment insurance data. And all we really get with that data are some identifiers to match a wage in an industry. So the only way that we would know information about sex, gender, or race ethnicity would be if they had gone through the education system in Kentucky. So for individuals that graduate from Kentucky institutions, we would have that type of information and be able to disaggregate it. But for the general population, we do not.
I don't think most, I don't think any systems with wage records, with the unemployment insurance program, I don't think any of those records come in with gender or race information. We have wanted for quite some time to be able to match, though, with driver's license data, and that's a place where you could actually yield that. There are always concerns, of course, though, that I think my colleagues have heard about. Sometimes people think these systems might get too big because they're integrated. When I talk about matching to driver's license data, though, I'm not trying to match every variable that's part of the driver's license. There are really just a few things that I want to know in order to confirm that somebody's living in our state, for example. We're also not trying to capture everything that an education department collects. There are pieces of this information that we need to use to create new data sets. I just say that because I think sometimes people think we're building giant data warehouses. And that's not really the intent. The intent is to build really useful data warehouses, and we want to keep them as lean as we can. Because you're really going to perform better that way.
In Minnesota, the situation is the same where the wage detail doesn't have the information, so we do get it from the college linkage. I would also like to say, though, that we have produced analyses of the differences by race, by ethnicity, by gender, and I'd be happy to share an example of one of those with you if you would care to see it.
Yeah, the UI system does collect male, female, race, ethnicity. There's only one state that doesn't release that publicly. So maybe we can connect you back with where that is housed. I wanted to ask you, if you're going to build a national data system, because there is a lot of this interest in how a workforce system is doing, as well as higher ed, how are you going to connect wages for individuals like Indiana that exports 60% of the graduates' apparel to other states? What kind of system would you build to actually pull that in, or would you tap into the Census Bureau? I'm curious on the thoughts.
Yes, thanks, Scott, for the information on the wage record data, and I'll have to talk to your former staff about why we're not getting the demographics there. I think some of the things that have occurred actually the past couple of days with this meeting is that Joshua from Ohio State University and Kate from Kentucky, and we've also talked with Scott Powell from Michigan, we really want to start sharing data. So that's one way that we believe that we could start seeing where our graduates are going. One of the things we have to be careful with, though, is that Indiana is, I think, as of last year, the third highest importer of college freshmen, right after Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. We import thousands of students every year, most of whom don't stay in Indiana after they graduate. Now, some of us may think, and I happen to think this way as well, we have a lost opportunity there because these are people that we could attract to jobs in our state and get them to stay in our state. But let's be realistic. Some people want to go back home. Some people may want to get as far away as China or India or some other country. You know, we live in a country where mobility is prized. So what we want to do, Scott, is share data across states. There are some organizations, WICHE, which I can never remember what WICHE stands for.
The Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education?
They're a multi-state consortium that does data sharing. I think there's also opportunities with the Census Bureau and through the LEHD program to potentially share data that way. I think they've set up a really good model of using state workforce data as well as their own data. So I think there are multiple paths.
And I would add, to make the situation a little bit more complicated, when you talk about putting all of these together and all of these systems, which is kind of what you may be implying there, all of our systems are actually quite diverse, and they're all housed in different places, and some are centralized and some are federated, and all really answer to not only federal laws but also their state laws, which in many cases are much stricter than the federal laws. So I think that it really makes it complicated. So what we're doing now, so this doesn't answer your question at all about how we would go about a bigger solution, but would be something that Carol mentioned. So can we get some kind of very specific examples? I'm thinking about where folks in Kentucky might be going to, kind of in regional proximity, which is why she was bringing us up, as well as the Witchy Project, which is a northwestern consortium. So I think that there are different solutions that we are proposing, but I think being able to leverage some of the existing systems better, specifically from an SLEDS, State Longitudinal Data System perspective, would be helpful. So we have systems like RIS2, which someone will have to, workforce, wage record, interchange system. RIS2. And so being able to maybe leverage those existing systems as well as, we've talked about census and those data, that would actually be very helpful for us.
What about I saw this sheet where you have the data on the projected occupations. So some training programs can last up to 3 to 4 years. What's happening? Are you preparing those students for the jobs that are going to be available in 3 to 4 years? Because what happens, if the need changes?
I think that's a real challenge. Our first step was just trying to figure out what's in demand right now and how we align that. So we've begun there, but I think that's a really great question. Even if you think about a 4-year degree, which now we even look at those in 6-year possibilities. So what are the demand for those occupations? So right now, what we can do is tell you what's available today, or actually probably last year. But we're really actively working towards that, because I think that's a great question. So so often we think that, oh, this is going to be the next big thing, and then perhaps it's not. So I think that's a really great comment, and I wish that I had a solution.
Well, I was going to say the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually has a solution and a partnership with all 50 states to produce occupation projections 10 years out. So they have a base year and then they project, I think the latest year right now is 2022. And so they look at replacement as well as new jobs. If you've ever heard of the Occupational Handbook, that's where they pull in a lot of the projections data, and I know a lot of kids are assigned that in high school.
Yeah. I was going to say a lot of the folks that we've talked to in the workforce and education systems have found that they kind of hedge their bets by looking at occupational clusters, and that's been really effective. So if you start to look at sort of projections in groups of occupations, and then because you're building skills that can be sort of easily pivoted or transferred if your expectations don't pan out, that's been able to be successful and use the data in an effective way. Yeah, Rachel.
I was really taken that each of you showed a public-facing website or tool. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how you intend this information to be useful to students and families specifically.
We wound up developing and are extending right now a tool that we call In Reality. It's a tool that mixes in the occupation data, wage information, with cost of living for our communities around the state. But it's a fun tool. We wound up using, and actually this was something Scott had asked us to do after he saw the Texas tool. So we steal, I know Texas admitted yesterday in our meeting that they take other people's ideas, so do we. But with the in-reality tool, you go through and you build a budget. Are you going to live with your parents, a studio apartment? Are you going to have a car? How much is public transportation? You go through this budget building, and you wind up being really shocked at how expensive you are as an 18-year-old. And you use that to help inform what kinds of occupations you would want to get and what kind of education you need to get. And it's all tied together in a marvelous web-based tool. And this is directed directly at high school students as well as college students. But we have also found recently that there are people looking at second and third careers now who have been using it successfully. So we really like consumer facing kind of tools.
I would say we want it to be used in two ways. The first is to return to something that Rachel said earlier, in that measuring full-time employment wages, that's not the only thing that a degree is about and a major is about. You know, there are other ways to measure sort of fulfillment and outcomes than just wages and employment. But that being said, it is a very useful thing to at least be able to consider when you're making your choices. When I chose to major in political science, something like this didn't exist. Now, in the end, I'm very happy with my decision, but it certainly, again, would have been nice information to have. But then as well, focusing it more on workforce development and away from higher education for a moment, also people who are job seekers who are in our programs, right? There are certain programs that are requiring them to get training in in-demand jobs or things of that nature. And so this can help fulfill those needs as well, so that there's more information to bring to bear on their choices of training and the outcomes that they're going to have when completing that training.
That question for us is really our next step, we think, and where we want to go with the work that we're doing. A lot of the reports that we have are really almost at the state agency level. So it's really to help state policymakers, those that are administering these programs, understand the outcomes. So our next step is really to provide more information in a more usable fashion. It's we do not have the interactive tools that, for example, that Minnesota has. We have a lot of PDFs and a lot of Excel spreadsheets, which, you know, I do love Excel spreadsheets, so I'm looking forward to exploring yours. But we really want to do something that's a little bit more active and a little bit more forward-facing to who that customer base is. So I think that that's perfectly descriptive of the work that we plan to do next.
So I think some people, oh yes, I think some people will have to go. So why don't we close, and we'll be here for another 20 minutes or so in case folks have individual questions. We're happy to answer, and please grab something to eat as well, and a cookie for the road. So thank you so much. Two cookies, yes.